Good morning, class. Now let's proceed already with the discussion of our next lesson, which refers to the elements of the financial statement and the account. Again, I am your instructor, Maria Angelica B. Sunga. So now let's discuss the different elements of financial statements. In the last uploaded video of mine in our class, I have discussed there the different categories or which we have discussed there. One of the functions of accounting is referring to classification. So when we say accounting, this includes the functions of recording, classifying, and summarizing. So here, now in this topic, we're going to do the function of accounting, which is referring to classifying. So in classifying, you have to consider the elements of financial position. Whereas from the last video material that I have uploaded in our class, I have discussed there the different objectives of financial statement. Whereas in the objectives of the financial statements, it was discussed there that we are referring to the financial position of the business and the performance of the business. So in getting the financial position of the business, we could be able to see the financial stability of the business itself by means of looking onto the statement of financial possession, or what we call as the balance sheet. And whereas when we say looking onto the performance of the business, we would like to see here if the business is earning or not. Kung kumikita ba ang business natin o hindi, by just simply looking onto the net income. And we can only see that by means of the preparation or by means of looking onto the income statement of the business. Okay? So here, let's talk about the elements of financial statements. What are those elements of financial statement? So in the function of accounting, which is referring to classifying, we tend to categorize or divide the different accounts into its useful categories for it to become easier for us to do all the accounting functions. Now here, when we say elements, these are divided into useful categories, such as what we have mentioned earlier, the financial position and the financial performance. Okay, for the financial position, we have here, and we have the what we call as the performance. Under financial position, we have this element, financial position, categorized with the inclusion of the assets, liabilities, and equity. So when we say financial position, in simple terms, this includes the assets, liabilities, and owner's equity, which we will discuss later, the definition of each. So what is the definition of assets? What is the definition of liabilities and equity? For the performance, it includes the income, which somehow could be referring to your revenue and your gains. And for expenses, of course, it is included in the computation of your net income. And of course, your losses, whether you're going to have net income or net loss. So we hope that in a business, we get net income. However, there are some times na hindi natin may iwasan na instead of net income, we come up with net loss. So, yun yung under ng performance natin. Ano-ano yung mga accounts under each element. So the first element is financial position. It is referring to assets, liabilities, and equity. For the element of performance of financial statements, we have income, revenue, gains, expenses, and losses. So these are the accounts that we have to consider when we are going to prepare for the statement of financial position and for the income statement. Okay, let's proceed already with the discussion of each account under the elements of financial possession. First is what we call asset. So when we say assets, these are the resources owned by the business which are used in generating income. Sometimes, class, we have our misconception when it comes to the use of or when it comes to the definition of the assets. Kasi ang nangyayari minsan, when we are talking about business, pag sinabi nating assets, hindi siya katulad nung say, for example, bumili kayo ng sasakyan, but you intend to use that car or that vehicle for personal use. So, sabi, bibili ako ng sasakyan kasi para may pang-service ako pag ako ay gumagala. So, that is not to be considered as your asset. Sometimes, I consider that myself as an expense rather than asset kasi bumababa yung value niya, and at the same time, there are other things that I should pay for its maintenance. Diba? So, for me, I consider that if I'm going to use that for personal use, rather than considering that as an asset, I do consider that as an expense for me. So, in business, yung nagkakaroon tayo ng misconception. If bumili tayo ng isang bagay at sa tingin nyo yun ay gagamitin nyo for personal use, it couldn't be considered as an asset. It could be considered as an asset if it is helping you to generate income. Halimbawa, bumili ka ng sasakyan. You acquire vehicle for the business to be utilized by the business. Gagawin siyang service ng business natin for the delivery of our products or para panghatid sa mga kliyente natin, 'di ba? If we are into travel agency or into hotel, bumili kayo ng sasakyan para may pangsundo kayo sa mga clients ninyo from airport to our hotel. So, if that resources or if that asset is being used by the business to generate income, it now could be considered as an asset. Pero kung bumili ka ng isang bagay para gamitin para sa pansarili mong dahilan, iyon ay hindi natin maiko-consider as an asset. Okay? So, pag sinabi nating asset, it is referring to the resources, pagmamay-ari ng ating negosyo na ginagamit para magkaroon tayo ng kita. Okay? So, what are the examples of the assets? So, we would like to categorize the assets into two. So, we have current assets and non-current assets. So, current assets are referring to cash equivalents, notes receivable, accounts receivable, inventories, prepaid expenses. So, how does it be called as current assets? Ba't ba siya tinawag na current assets? Simply because these assets or these resources are the assets that could easily be converted into cash. It is referring already to cash or assets that could easily be converted into cash. So, ang tinutukoy ng current assets, cash siya, or yung mga assets or resources na madaling i-convert into cash. Halimbawa, cash equivalents. Ano po ba ibig sabihin ng cash equivalents? Ito yung tinatawag natin mga cash gifts. Kapag, say for example, ang company nyo may pa-raffle sa inyo, nanalo kayo ng cash gift, 1,000 worth of groceries or yung sa grocery stores na pinuntahan ninyo, may paraffle din sila, namimigay sila ng mga cash gifts na kung saan yung cash gift na yon ay may certain amount siya na equivalent. So, say for example, groceries amounting to 1,000, imbes na cash mong babayaran, makakapag-grocery ka na nagkakahalaga ng 1,000 pesos. So, hindi mo kailangan maglabas ng pera ng cash because it is in the form of cash gift, yung pagparaan ng pagbabayad mo doon sa grocery na binili mo. Another example or the common example of cash equivalent is the check. So, may mga cheque tayo, hindi nyo hawak yung cash, pero may cheque tayo. That is the equivalent of money. May equivalent cash value siya. So, another is notes receivable, accounts receivable. Actually, it has almost the same nature. Okay? Pag sinabi nating accounts receivable, ang may utang sa atin dito, class, is yung customer natin. Kaya nga siya resources na pagmamay-ari ng ating business. Resources, pagmamay-ari ng ating negosyo. So, ibig sabihin ng accounts receivable ay tumutukoy sa pagkakautang ng ating customer. Bakit siya naging pagmamay-ari, ma'am? Naging pagmamay-ari siya ng ating negosyo dahil ito ay tumutukoy din sa cash or pera na matatanggap natin kapag binayaran na tayo ng ating kliyente or ng ating customer. So, yun yung tumutukoy sa accounts receivable. Halimbawa, ako ang may-ari ng negosyo. Si Mr. A ang kliyente ko. So, si Mr. A, naserbisyuhan ko na nakapag-render na ako ng service kay Mr. A, yung business ko, nakapag-render na ng service kay Mr. A. Si Mr. A naman, hindi pa ako binabayaran. So, ibig sabihin, may utang si customer, si Mr. A, sa business ko. So, ngayon, paano ko siya i-record? Hindi ko siya pwedeng i-record na cash dahil wala naman akong natanggap na cash. So, ang tawag natin doon ay accounts receivable kapag may pagkakautang si kliyente sa atin. Bakit naman po tinawag na notes receivable? Actually, the nature is the same. May pagkakautang si customer, may pagkakautang si client sa ating business. However, our customer or our clients issued a note na kung saan it indicates the date kung kailan siya magbabayad, kung kailan siya magbabayad, magkano ang kanyang pagkakautang, at maaari ano ang dahilan ba't hindi siya nakapagbayad. Those are the things that we include in the notes, 'di ba? So, kasama dyan yung tinatawag nating promissory notes. Nag-i-issue si customer kay business natin ng promissory notes promising that they will pay their obligation to our business in this particular date. So, yun yung pinagkaiba niya kay accounts receivable. Si accounts receivable, may pagkakautang si customer sa ating business pero wala siyang in-issue na notes. However, dito naman kay notes receivable, may pagkakautang si customer sa atin pero nag-issue siya ng notes. Example, promissory notes, which the customer is promising that he or she will pay our business in this particular date with this particular amount. Okay? Another is what we call as the inventories. If we are into merchandising and manufacturing business, we do consider the inventories as part of the current assets. And sometimes, it could be considered as non-current assets din. Kasi there are some inventories. Ito yung tumutukoy sa mga paninda natin, sa stocks natin, na ginagamit natin. Say for example, in merchandising business, nagtitinda ka ng damit. So, yung mga damit are considered as your inventories. So, yung mga paninda mo, yun yung inventories natin. So, sa manufacturing naman natin, yung mga materials na ginagamit nyo para mabuo yung isang produkto, that is considered as our inventory. So, minsan, pwede natin siyang i-considered as current assets, minsan, pwede natin siyang i-considered as non-current asset. Kasi, minsan, hindi siya ganun kadaling ibenta. So, kapag hindi siya ganun kadaling ibenta, ibig sabihin, it includes the characteristic of the non-current asset. Kasi pag sinabi nga, di ba natin na current assets, this is referring to the resources. It's either cash already or referring to the resources which could easily be converted into cash. Okay? So, next is prepaid expenses. Pag sinabi natin prepaid expenses class, from the word itself, expenses, di ba dapat po kasama siya sa performance element ng financial statement? Yeah, it includes the characteristic of an expense. However, doon siya nanggaling. However, ito'y tumutukoy sa mga expenses natin. Say, for example, rent, salaries. Ito yung tumutukoy sa mga expenses natin na binabayaran natin in advance. Kaya siya tinawag na prepaid expenses. Binabayaran natin siya in advance. Halimbawa, ang upa natin sa pwesto ng ating negosyo ay dahil nagre-renta lang tayo, hindi natin pagmamayari yung pwesto ng ating negosyo, nagre-renta tayo. So, instead of paying the monthly rent expense, so now, we are going to pay the rent expense for the whole year in advance. So, yung renta natin sa loob ng isang taon ay babayaran na natin. So, could that be considered as an expense in consideration of what we have discussed or what I have discussed in the last video material that I have uploaded under the expense recognition principle? Kasi under expense recognition principle, we considered it as an expense if it has been consumed already and not if it is being paid. Okay? Kino-consider natin yung expense as an expense kapag ito ay nagamit na, hindi kung kailan mo siya babayaran o binayaran. So, ibig sabihin, kung binayaran mo, yung expense mo, supposedly ay expense mo in advance, so ibig sabihin, hindi natin siya makukonsider as an expense. Kasi ulitin ko, kinoconsider lang natin siya as an expense kapag nagamit na natin siya. Paano yun? Binayaran mo siya in advance. Di hindi mo pa siya nagamit. Tama? So, hindi mo pa siya nagamit. So, ibig sabihin, hindi siya expense dahil hindi mo pa nga siya nagagamit. So, therefore, it is not an expense but rather an asset. Dahil sa loob ng ilang buwan na binayaran mo yon dahil nag-advance ka for 1 year, ibig sabihin nun, pag mamay-ari mo yung asset na yon sa loob ng ilang buwan na binayaran mo siya in advance. Hindi siya expense but rather an asset already dahil hindi mo pa siya nagagamit. Dahil binayaran mo siya in advance. Halimbawa, bukod sa renta, nagbayad ka sa salaries. We have our salaries expense, di ba? Sa wage. So, imbes na bayaran mo siya kada buwan, yung empleyado mo ay binayaran mo ng kanyang sweldo in advance sa loob ng 3 buwan. So, yung empleyado mo na yon hindi pa nakakapag-render ng service sa iyo bilang siya ay empleyado mo. So, ibig sabihin, yung empleyado mo, nasweldohan mo na in advance pero hindi pa niya nagagampanan yung trabaho niya sa iyo. So, ibig sabihin, hindi mo pa nako-consume. Diba? Hindi mo pa nako-consume yung service ng empleyado mo. Hindi mo pa siya nagagamit, we cannot consider that as an expense. Dahil hindi mo pa nagagamit yung service ng empleyado mo, it couldn't be considered as your expense. Rather, it will now be considered as your asset. Pag mamay-ari mo yung serbisyo ng empleyado mo sa loob ng ilang buwan na in-advance mo yung sweldo niya. Okay? Yung serbisyo ang pagmamay-ari mo doon. Okay po? So, those are some of the examples of the current assets that we have under asset. Now, let's talk about the non-current assets. Sinabi natin kanina, the definition of the current assets are referring to cash itself or those resources which could easily be converted into cash. Pag sinabi natin ng non-current assets, kabaliktaran niya. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya ganun kadaling i-convert into cash. Bakit kaya? Isa sa reason bakit hindi siya ganun kadaling i-convert into cash ay dahil malaki ang halaga ng asset na yon. Kaya hindi siya kayang ibenta agad-agad dahil hindi lahat kayang i-afford yung ganun kalaking halaga ng asset na binibenta mo. Okay? Halimbawa, property, plants, and equipment. We have the land, we have the building, we have the equipment, we have the machines. So we are aware that most of those mentioned ay may mga malalaking halaga. 'Di ba? May mga malalaking value. So therefore, hindi siya ganun kadaling i-convert into cash. The same with investments. Say for example, long-term investments. Nag-invest si business natin into stocks. So we all know that stocks pag sinabi nating stocks, long-term siya. So, hindi siya ganun kadaling i-convert into cash. It takes time for you to convert into cash. Another is yung mga intangible assets like patent, copyrights, royalty. Yan yung mga tinatawag nating intangible assets or assets which are not visible in our naked eyes. So, intangible assets, patent, copyright, royalty, yan yung mga tinatawag nating intangible assets. And of course, we have other assets na hindi pa natin na-mention, baka may alam pa kayo. You may add it into our class or share it in our group chat. Okay? So, those are what we call as the assets, categorized into current assets and non-current assets. Next, liabilities. Pag sinabi nating liabilities, this refers to the obligations owed by the business to other entity or individual. So, ibig sabihin, ang may pagkakautang dito, hindi ang customer. Ang may pagkakautang dito ay ang business mismo natin. Halimbawa, ang business ko ay may pagkakautang kay Mr. A. Si Mr. A ang supplier ko. So, ako, umorder ako ng supply kay Mr. A pero hindi ko pa siya binabayaran. So, ibig sabihin, may pagkakautang ako kay Mr. A or yung business natin ay may pagkakautang kay Mr. A. So what are the examples of the common examples of liabilities? We can also consider the two categories such as current assets and non-current assets. The same meaning. Gagawin natin siyang current liabilities and non-current liabilities. Kino-consider natin siyang current liabilities kasi you will pay the obligation in a short period of time, while it is considered as non-current non-current liability since babayaran mo siya, the term is referring to a longer period. Mas mahaba yung term na pinag-usapan nyo in consideration of the payment for the obligation itself. Okay? So, ulitin ko, pag sinabi nating liabilities, this refers to obligation of the business or pagkakautang ng negosyo natin sa ibang tao or sa ibang entity. Okay? Or sa ibang business. Halimbawa nito, notes payable and accounts payable. The same on how I defined the accounts receivable and notes receivable. Ang pinagkaiba lang niya, si accounts payable ay tumutukoy sa pagkakautang ng ating negosyo. So, ibig sabihin, accounts payable, may pagkakautang tayo kay ate sa ibang negosyo. Halimbawa, yung binigay ko sa inyo kanina, ang business natin, bumili ng supplies sa business ni Mr. A. So, ngayon, hindi ko pa binayaran yun ng cash. So, ibig sabihin, may pagkakautang yung business ko sa business ni Mr. A, sa business ni Mr. A, since si Mr. A yung ating supplier. Okay? So, ngayon, anong pinagkaiba niya kay notes payable? Ganon din sa pinagkaiba kanina sa dinefine natin sa under assets. Ang pinagkaiba ni notes payable kay accounts payable, may ini-issue ang business natin kay doon sa pinagkakautangan natin, doon sa other entity or individual. So, may pagkakautang tayo sa ibang tao or sa ibang business, pero nag-i-issue tayo ng notes. Sometimes it is referring to a promissory notes which our business promised to pay a certain amount in a certain period of time or in a certain period or date na kung saan, certain date na kung saan kailangan natin bayaran yung ating pagkakautang. So, ang pinagkaiba ni accounts payable at saka kay notes payable is nag-i-issue lang tayo ng notes. Okay? Kaya accounts payable, walang notes na ini-issue. Kay notes payable, may ini-issue tayong notes. For accrued liabilities, okay, the same explanation. For here, unearned revenues. Ito, baka nalilito kayo. Pag sinabi kasi nating revenue, para siyang sa expense kanina. Sa revenue kasi, it should be part of the performance elements of financial statement. Di ba, ma'am, yan po ay part ng income? Okay, that is correct. Revenue is part of the income. However, it is called as unearned revenue. So, pagkakautang siya ulit ng negosyo, liability siya, 'di ba? So, pagkakautang siya ng negosyo in what means? 'Di ba? Sa anong paraan nagkautang ang ating negosyo? Halimbawa, ang negosyo ko ay may pagkakautang sa negosyo ni Mr. A. So, si Mr. A yung ating client. Sabihin natin ang ating client naman ay si Mr. A. So, naging client natin si Mr. A, yung business ko may pagkakautang kay Mr. A na client natin. So, ngayon, nagbayad kasi in advance si Mr. A sa atin. So, yung customer daw natin or yung client natin, nagbayad sa business natin in advance. So, in advance po yun ha. So, ngayon, nagbayad siya sa atin, sa business natin, pero hindi pa ako or yung business ko ay hindi pa nakapag-render ng service sa kanya. Halimbawa, yung business ko is into travel agency. O, my business is travel agency. So, ngayon, itong si Mr. A nagbayad na sa travel agency ko, pero yung travel agency ko hindi pa nakapag-render ng service kay Mr. A. So, ibig sabihin, may pagkakautang ang aking business ng serbisyo kay Mr. A. So, may pagkakautang akong serbisyo, yung business ko, may pagkakautang na serbisyo kay Mr. A. Kaya tinawag siya unearned revenue. And that is part of what we have discussed also in the uploaded video material, which is referring to the revenue recognition principle, that we considered only revenue as revenue if it is already delivered or distributed to our customer or client. rendered or distributed or delivered to our clients. So, may i-consider lang natin siya as revenue kung nakapag-render na tayo ng serbisyo sa customer natin or kapag na-deliver na natin yung produkto natin sa customer natin. Pero pag hindi natin nagawa pa yon, it couldn't be considered as revenue. Just like what I have given you earlier as an example, na kung saan nagbayad si customer sa atin ng bayad for the service, pero yung service hindi pa nare-render ng business natin kay client. So that is considered as liability, pagkakautang ng ating negosyo sa paraan ng serbisyo sa ating client. So may pagkakautang tayo kay client na serbisyo sa kanya. Okay? So mortgage payable, bonds payable, and other debts of the enterprises. Okay? So mortgage, kapag tayo ay may nag-loan tayo sa mga financial institutions, sa iba't ibang assets. Okay, bonds payable, kapag may nag-invest sa atin, na may investor, external investor, may nag-invest sa atin, we issued bonds. So, ibig sabihin, may pagkakautang tayo sa kanila. And other debts of the enterprise that we have not mentioned here. Okay? Next is the equity. So, when we say equity, it is a residual interest in the assets of the enterprise after deducting all the liabilities. So, this refers to the capital, drawings, or withdrawal. So, these two are the common accounts that are involved in what we call as an equity. And sometimes, revenue has an effect under equity when we are performing an accounting equation. So, that's it already for the financial position. Now, let's proceed already for the performance. For the performance, we have to define here the income. For the income, it increases the economic benefits during the accounting period in the form of inflows or enhancements of assets or decreases of liabilities that results and increases in equity other than those relating to contributions from equity participants. So if we are going to consider the accounting equation, the income has something to do with the equity account. So, nadadagdag siya or nababawas, it depends. So, ang revenue natin, nadadagdagan, so it therefore increases also the equity of our business or pagmamayari. Okay? So, part of the income is what we call as the gains. So, gains represent other items that meet the definition of income and may or may not arise in the course of the ordinary activities of an enterprise. Pag sinabi natin gains, ito yung kinita natin, kinita ng negosyo na labas sa usual na ginagawa ng ating negosyo para kumita. Halimbawa, ang company natin ay nagre-render, yung travel agency natin nagre-render ng service sa client. Ang nangyari, yung travel agency natin nag-refer ng client sa iba pang agency or sa iba pang companies or yung travel agency natin, yung client natin, ni-refer naman natin sa hotel. So si hotel minsan may binabayaran kay travel agency as referral. So ang tawag doon referral revenue. So dahil nag-refer siya, may makukuha siya doon. So therefore, hindi naman siya usual na ginagawa ng business natin. Hindi talaga yun yung main source ng income ng business natin. So, kapag labas na siya doon sa usual na source or main source ng income ng business natin, tinatawag natin siyang gains. Kasi, hindi naman talaga tayo nagre-refer. Ang nangyayari kasi, nag-refer lang tayo kasi kailangan ng ating client. So, ni-refer natin si client natin doon sa hotel. Si hotel, nagbayad ng referral kay business natin. So, yun, ang tawag natin doon ay gains. Okay? So, gains, which is also part of the income. Somehow, it's considered as an income. However, the nature on how we get the income is different from the main source or from the main activity that we do within our business. Okay? Next is what we call as the revenue. Ito na yun. So, revenue arises in the course of the ordinary activities of an enterprise and depends on the nature or type of the business. So, ito na mismo yung natawag nating pinanggagalingan mismo ng kita ng ating negosyo. O ito na yung tumutukoy sa kita mismo ng ating negosyo na nanggagaling dun sa usual or typical activities na ginagawa natin doon sa ating negosyo. Sa travel agency, yung service ng travel agency, kung nakapag-render tayo ng service, may client tayo, that is our revenue. Unlike sa gains kasi, hindi siya yun yung mismong pinagkukuhanan ng income. Yung activities na ginagawa natin doon is hindi yun yung typical or yung main source ng income ng ating negosyo. Pag revenue kasi, yun yung mismong ginagawa ng ating negosyo at doon nanggagaling yung kita or revenue ng ating negosyo. Halimbawa niya, nakadepende yan sa kung ano ang nature or type ng business natin. So, in general, we call it as our revenue. Pero nakadepende siya sa kung anong klase ng negosyo yung meron tayo. Halimbawa, we are into service business. Kasi nga, we are in travel agency, di ba? So, sa travel agency natin, we are into service business. Anong dapat nating itawag pag kumita tayo? Halimbawa, yung travel agency ko, nakapag-render ng service kay Mr. A as our client. So, nagbayad si Mr. A sa ating business. So, matatawag natin siya as our service revenue. Kasi yung type ng business natin dun ay service. Okay? For sales revenue naman, tinatawag natin siyang sales or sales revenue kapag yung business natin ay into merchandising business or manufacturing business. Kapag hindi siya merchandising, hindi siya manufacturing, pag siya ay service business, ang tawag natin dyan ay service revenue. Ulitin ko, kapag ang business natin is into merchandising or manufacturing, we call our income or revenue as sales revenue. Okay, I hope that is clear. Next is expenses. Ito yung tinutukoy ko kanina na expenses is yung mga gastusin. Anong pinagkaiba ba ni expenses kay liabilities? Pag sinabi nating expenses, it decreases in economic benefits during the accounting period in the form of outflows or depletions of assets or incurrences of liabilities that results in decreases in equity other than those relating to distributions to equity participants. Sa madaling salita, pag sinabi nating expenses, gastusin ng ating negosyo. Ito yung gastusin natin sa ating negosyo. Ano yung pinagkaiba niya kay liabilities? Pag sinabi nating liabilities, pagkakautang na dapat bayaran ng negosyo. Sa expenses po ay yung mga regular na binabayaran o gastusin ng ating negosyo. Ano yung mga halimbawa ng expenses? First example of expense is salaries. Di ba regular na binabayaran ng business natin yung mga sweldo ng ating empleyado? That is why it is considered as an expense. Another expense is yung tinatawag nating utilities. Utilities, yun yung general term na ginagamit natin when we declare our expense for electricity and water. Okay? Ulitin ko yung expense recognition principle ha. We considered expense as an expense when the business consumed already the product or services. Kapag nagamit na siya, hindi kung kailan mo siya binayaran. So therefore, electricity and water expense are considered as an expense dahil kailan ba dumadating ang bill natin ng kuryente? Di ba kapag nagamit na natin siya? Diba? So, therefore, it is an expense. Ganon din ang salaries. Binabayaran natin ang sweldo dahil nakapag-render na ng serbisyo yung empleyado natin sa ating negosyo. Ibig sabihin na consumed na natin yung service ng ating empleyado bago natin siya bayaran. So, that is an expense. Nagamit na ng business, kaya natin siya kino-considered as an expense. So, utilities expense, the word utilities is the general term that we use for declaring our electricity and water expense. So, as much as possible, we use the term utilities. Kapag may nabasa kayo, the business paid electricity bill for the month. So, instead of electricity expense ang ilalagay ninyo, you just simply use the term utilities. The same with water. Kapag nasabi natin that the business paid the water bill for the month, instead of declaring it as water expense, you declare it as utilities expense. Okay? Another, interest expense. Kapag ang negosyo natin may pagkakautang, so dapat dating bayaran din regularly yung interest natin. interest dun sa pagkakautang natin. So, that is considered as interest expense. Another, rent expense. So, gastusin siya kasi lalo na kapag tayo ay nangungupahan lang, yung pwesto ng ating negosyo ay hindi sa atin, therefore, you have to pay for the rent regularly. So, monthly yan. So, diniscuss naman natin under ng asset kanina kung bakit siya nagiging asset yung rent. So, here, it is considered as rent expense dahil nagamit na natin yung pwesto sa loob ng isang buwan bago natin siya bayaran. Okay? Another is insurance expense. Siyempre, kapag nagbabayad tayo ng insurance, say for example, bumili ka ng kotse, as magiging service siya for the delivery ng product natin sa client natin, or kapag nagsusundo tayo ng mga clients natin from the airport to to the hotel, 'di ba? So ginagamit natin siya doon, and doon yung sasakyan na yon pina-insure ko. Okay? Naka-insure siya. So I have to pay for the insurance expense regularly kung kailan yung term of payment for the insurance or sa plan na kinuha ko for the insurance. Another is depreciation expense. I hope that you know what depreciation means. So, pag sinabi nating depreciation, ito yung pagbaba ng value ng asset na binili natin. Halimbawa, yung vehicle na binili natin. Sa vehicle na binili ng negosyo, nagbababa ang value niyan. From the moment na binili mo siya, ginamit mo siya, bumababa ang value niya. So, yun yung tinatawag nating depreciation. Magkano yung halaga na ibinaba doon sa value ng asset na binili natin. Okay? So, yun yung tinatawag nating depreciation expense. However, there are some assets na hindi nagbababa ang value. Rather, tumataas pa yung value or nag-appreciate yung value niya. Halimbawa, land. Habang tumatagal, mas tumataas ang halaga niya. Mga precious metals and stones. So, those are the examples of assets that appreciates in value rather than depreciates in value. So, yung mga equipment, machines, building, those were considered as assets which depreciates in value. Nagde-depreciate yung value niya or bumababa yung value. So, tinatawag natin siyang depreciation expense dahil yun yung halaga na ibinaba nung value nung asset na binili natin for the business. Another is yung mga miscellaneous expense na mga hindi inaasahan natin ang mga gastusin sa business natin, hindi yan mawawala. So, we declare that as miscellaneous expense instead of declaring it one by one. Baka sobrang dami nun. Hindi naman natin na kailangan i-declare siya one by one, lalo na kung hindi naman ganun kalaki yung halaga nung inilabas nating pera. Another is depreciation expense. Naulit lang siya. I have discussed it already earlier. Okay? So, losses. Ito yung sinabi natin that when we are referring to the performance of the business, you could, and also in the preparation of the financial statement, it could be referring to getting the net income or net losses. So, here, hindi man natin gustuhin, pero minsan may negosyo na instead of coming up into having a net income, they derived into having losses or net loss. So this represents decreases in economic benefits and as such are no different in the nature from other expenses. So ito yung paglabas ng pera, nagiging expense na siya ng ating negosyo dahil hindi na kumikita yung negosyo natin. Okay? Ito na yung sinasabi natin, hindi kumikita yung ating negosyo. Therefore, the business is not having a good performance if we arrived into getting net loss instead of getting net income. Okay, lastly, the last topic of ours is referring to the account. So, when we say account, it is maybe defined as a detailed record of the increases or decreases in balance of each element that appears in an entity financial statement. So, the simplest form of the account is known as the T account. Bakit ba siya tinatawag na T account? Kasi if you will try to look at the picture below here, it could be seen that its appearance is the same with letter T. Kaya siya tinawag na T account. Kasi nakalagay siya sa letter T. So, it comprises of 3 parts. So, first is yung account title. Anong account yan? Say, for example, cash. Okay? So, account title, cash yan. Another, sa debit side and credit side, saan siya nakalagay? Lalagay natin dyan magkano yung amount, naka-debit ba siya or naka-credit. So, sa later topics natin, i-discuss natin on how we are going to make our T accounts. Okay? And which could be used in the preparation of the financial statements. But before that, we will discuss first on how we are going to make a double entry system, from which titingnan na natin ano yung dapat nating i-debit, ano yung dapat nating i-credit. And of course, before we could able to do that, we will discuss first also yung tinatawag natin, yung normal balances. Para malaman ninyo ano ba yung typical na balance ng asset, liabilities, equity accounts, at saka yung tinatawag nating income accounts, revenue, the service or sales revenue, expenses. Yan. Ano yung mga normal balances nila? Sila ba ay nasa debit or nasa credit? Pag nadagdagan, nabawasan yung asset, saan siya ilalagay? Sa debit or credit? So, those will be discussed in the next video that I will upload. So, for now, I will give you an assignment with regards to the topic that I have discussed today. So, I will just post it in our Google Classroom. Okay? Thank you!